Hello and welcome to the WIHS Journal, Public Affairs from 104.9 FM. I'm Paul Kretschmer. On today and tomorrow's broadcast, Peter Wolfgang from the Family Institute of Connecticut will discuss what his organization is concerned about going into the 2020 General Assembly session from the perspective of the issues the FIC promotes.
Well, Paul, I think we're headed into a very difficult session for all the pro-life and pro-family movement here in the state of Connecticut. We had an incredibly good year in 2019. I called it a year of miracles. When you consider the way the 2018 election went down, where a lot of politicians in the state of Connecticut who do not share our values got elected in some cases explicitly on platforms that are hostile to biblical values, and with overwhelming strength at the legislature. We expected to have a very bad year in 2019. Instead, we won on every single battle. The Family Institute of Connecticut and our allies won on every single battle that we fought on in Connecticut. Now, the problem is we're still a year out from another election. And I think, contrary to conventional wisdom, if it's like 2016, then President Trump will actually have coattails in Connecticut. People tend to forget that the Republicans actually picked up strength in 2016 here in the state of Connecticut. The Republicans achieved parity with the Democrats in the state Senate for the first time in over a century, I think. And for the first time since it hadn't been since the 1980s that Republicans controlled one of the two chambers in Connecticut, albeit for just a couple of years in the mid-'80s. But it was really the first time since at least the 80s that the Republicans had that sort of strength. And because of that, unfortunately, we are a nonpartisan organization, but there's simply no denying that there are more people who are hostile to biblical values among the elected officials of the Democratic Party than there are among the Republicans. Now, that's not to say that the Republicans are any great shakes. The Republicans really don't get out there a lot of times and fight for our values the way the Democrats fight for the opposite. But the Republicans, at least, are not as sympathetic to attacks on biblical values. So having more of them in the legislature a lot of times will blunt the force of these attacks. So, we had the Republicans picked up seats in 2016 in the state legislature. They lost seats in 2018. And as a result, we thought 2019 would be our worst year ever. Instead, and this again goes to the fact that you can't really size it up in terms of partisanship, despite the increase in the Democrat strength at the state legislature, we still stopped every bad thing that they threw at us. And, Paul, a lot of times that was with Democrats working with us behind the scenes, particularly in a few key committees like public health. It was Democrats who killed assisted suicide, who killed pregnancy centers. Make no doubt about it. I mean, the Republicans were united in opposing these things. But unless there had been some Democrats who crossed the aisle behind closed doors, these things would be law right now. So as we head into 2020, when you look at that recent history, if recent history continues to hold up, if the pattern continues, then the Republicans may actually be picking up seats in 2020, which means for the anti-family forces at the state legislature, this could be their last shot for a while to get their most radical items. So that's just kind of by way of explaining what we expect going into 2020. We expect it to be a very difficult year. We think it's possible that anti-family forces will go for broke. They'll view it as like their last opportunity to reach for the brass ring before the election. So, all that's kind of a warm-up to your question, which is what do you expect to come up? First and foremost, and we're already hearing rumors that a hearing has been scheduled for February 19th. We are trying to confirm those rumors, but it looks like there will be a bill to remove the religious exemptions for parents who choose not to have their children vaccinated. Now, this is a complicated issue with a lot of good people on both sides of the issue. It's not cut and dry the way other religious liberty issues are. I understand that. Nevertheless, when we look at this, what we see is the camel's nose under the tent. Having been a guy who has been up at the state capitol and fought the other side for 20 years, I know how this works. They're master incrementalists. even if people can reasonably disagree over this issue, the real purpose is to take away a religious exemption and then plant that premise in the law, that precedent, Paul, where they can then come back later on and take away other religious liberty exemptions. So regardless of how you feel about the underlying issue of vaccinations themselves, I feel like there's a larger issue here that the Family Institute is going to take an interest in. We are going to support the groups who will be leading the fight to preserve that exemption.
As far as that goes, do you find yourself maybe in a position of talking about that kind of fluid situation in that regard that you described a moment ago, that where people can fall down on both sides of the issue and may not understand why you would fight for the protection of the exemption when someone else of a reasonable mind can say, but look at all of the kids that get sick, look at all the families that get disrupted, look how much pain and suffering and grief happens because people get sick or die because they didn't get vaccinated.
Right, that's true. We are walking a fine line here, Paul, because we don't deny. I mean, when it comes to abortion, we completely deny that the other side has any reasonable argument. When it comes to a number of the issues that FIC is best known for, those issues are really cut and dry if you're a person of biblical faith. When it comes to the vaccinations, it's one of the more, it's one of the few gray area issues that we've decided to take on, where I think good people could come down on either side. And, so the Family Institute is walking a fine line here. We do respect the arguments of people who may disagree with us on this, but there's a couple things I would say to them. One of which is the point I already made about the larger picture here, and this is the biggest motivating factor for FIC. We have been a watchdog in recent years on the religious liberty issue. We smell a rat here. Even while we respect that there are good people who disagree about vaccinations, it just strikes us as very strange. It seemed to come out of nowhere in the last year or so, the way the anti-vaxxers were sort of isolated and targeted as a group. And if you're familiar at all with Saul Alinsky tactics, this is how it's done. You find an enemy, you isolate it, and then you target it. And it just seemed to us like the mob mentality against the anti-vaxxers seemed to come out of nowhere. It seemed like there was an agenda. And, you could say, oh, well, you nutty person, don't you know all the experts agree that there's nothing wrong with vaccines and these anti-vaxxers are just crazy people? Well, we just ended a decade, the 2010s, Paul, where I think in a lot of instances the cranks turned out to be right. In some ways I think the alleged suicide of Jeffrey Epstein was a perfect ending to that decade. Mm-hmm. There's been so many ways in which we've all learned, and this, one could argue this is why Trump is in the White House. This is why Brexit happened in England. A lot of people really don't trust the establishment anymore. They really don't trust the experts. And so, I think we're right to look at things with maybe a more cynical eye and to be a little bit suspicious about how much we can trust this stuff. Now, granted, vaccines overall have definitely been a good for our country. If you look at old black and white film of children in crutches back in the days when they had polio. Vaccines overall have been a tremendous blessing for the United States. There's no question about that. But there have been these strange, unexplained instances where parents believe that being over-vaccinated has actually caused harm to some children. And we don't know how much we can trust the science on this. As a pro-lifer, I know that whenever there's some sort of scientific study linking a possible increase in breast cancer with legal abortion, boy, that gets buried, and you never hear a word about it.
Nope.
So, I think it behooves all of us in the 2020s as we enter this new decade, maybe to be a little more cynical about the experts and a little more questioning of them. And that would be my argument to people on the other side. That's why we are sympathetic to these parents.
Peter Wolfgang is the Executive Director of the Family Institute of Connecticut. For further information, call us at 860-346-1049. Selected editions are on the WIHS 1049 YouTube channel. The opinions expressed are those of the participants, not necessarily those of the staff or management of the station. I'm Paul Kretschmer on the WIHS Journal, Public Affairs from WIHS, Middletown.